A year ago, I was dragged into a hospital outside North Platte, Nebraska, barely clinging to life. My back had been torn open with deep lacerations. 3 ribs were fractured, and hypothermia had begun to settle deep into my body. My skin looked grayish beneath the blood. I was covered in claw marks and half-dried gore, shivering so violently the gurney rattled beneath me. The paramedics kept shouting at me to stay awake. I was slipping into shock from blood loss by the time they found me. They didn't think I was going to survive the night. They told the doctors they found me near a wrecked semi on I-80, lucky to be alive. They got that part right. I was lucky because I was attacked by a werewolf. I was heading to Colorado when I hitched a ride with a truck driver named Louis. He was quiet, mild-mannered, the kind of man people overlook without even realizing it. He asked me questions about my military career and life. As we rode in the filthy cab of the truck, there were clothes and blankets piled behind the seats and floor, and the bed looked like an animal den. And the smell. Lysol and blood. The disinfectant burned my nose the second the door shut. It smelled freshly sprayed. But underneath it there was another smell. Coppery like old pennies left in the sun mixed with a slaughterhouse floor after closing. This is the part I keep telling myself I imagined. He pulled over and told me he was a werewolf, then made a bet with me. Man against beast. If I survive, then I can live. Then, his eyes turning yellow, and he sprouted fur and fangs. I could see something evil was spreading through him from the inside out. I still hear the bones popping and seeing his fingers get longer and tipped with claws. I ran for my life and it chased me. Somehow I fought it off. Stabbed it made it fall into a river. Then I doubled back to the semi. A trooper was there. He was the only other person who believed me before Louis ripped through him. Not before I managed to climb into the rig and drive away. I needed speed. I turned around and charged at it while it was still ripping the trooper apart. I hit him with the semi-truck repeatedly until it pinned him against a tree, and then I set the semi on fire and watched it explode, blowing him to pieces. Somehow, after all that, he sent a bunch of flowers with a note promising he would see me again, betting me double or nothing, betting on the beast.
Welcome back to Obsidian Quill Publishing Nightmares. Tonight, we return to the dark highways of Nebraska. 1 year ago, a young man named Daryl accepted a ride from a quiet truck driver named Louis while traveling west on Interstate 80. Before the night was over, Louis revealed what he truly was. Not a man, but a paranormal predator, a werewolf. And under the light of the full moon that night, Daryl was hunted across frozen fields, abandoned roads, and empty farmland by a towering creature that stalked him for sport. Louis gave him a single chance to survive. Daryl took it. Daryl believed he killed the creature in a fiery wreck beside the highway. But nightmares don't burn that easily. Now the full moon is rising again. And something with yellow eyes is still searching for him because the hunt isn't over. Before we get started, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It's because of you that this channel is growing. Also remember my books, Blood in Brooklyn and The Hunt for Dogman, are on sale. On Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon, available in paperback, audiobook, and ebook. Let's get started on tonight's tale. This is Full Moon on I-80, Louis's Revenge.
I was supposed to be heading to Colorado. Instead, I spent 2 months in a hospital bed near North Platte, Nebraska, waking up screaming every time I fell asleep deep enough to dream. The police called me a hero after they found the wreckage of Louis's truck in that drainage ravine. They tied him to several disappearances along Interstate 80 and quietly handed me a reward for stopping the killings. $50,000. Blood money, enough to disappear. But it's hard to plan a future when fresh flowers keep arriving in your hospital room every Friday morning from a man who's supposed to be dead, each bouquet carrying another promise to kill you. The nurse who brought them was named Lorraine, a petite, curvy redhead. I liked how her hair that caught the morning sunlight like fire, green eyes, and a soft southern accent I couldn't quite place. Every time she walked into the room carrying those flowers, she saw the panic spread across my face. By the second delivery, she started placing them farther away from my bed, trying to spare me the sight of the cards. But the messages were always still visible, sitting there like little paper tombstones. I finally asked if she'd ever seen the person dropping them off. She told me she never got a good look at him, until the fourth delivery. That morning she lingered a while, talking to me longer than usual. I learned Lorraine had gone to Tulane University. No kids. Her whole life had become work and an empty apartment. She laughed softly and admitted she never had time for dating anymore, though she hinted she might make time for the right guy, or maybe the right patient. For a few minutes, I almost forgot about the flowers. Then she dropped the bombshell. "The man who brought them today," she said carefully. "Small frame, glasses, kind of nerdy looking. Honestly, he seemed genuinely worried about you." My heart started hammering so hard it hurt. No, it couldn't be him, but the way she described him. It was exactly how I remembered him. Louis. The room suddenly felt colder. The steady beep of the monitor sounded distant, drowned beneath the roar of blood pounding in my ears. Then Lorraine gave me a sympathetic smile and stepped into the hallway. That's when I heard her talking quietly to another nurse. "A whole family got killed in the next town over last night," she whispered. "Looked like some kind of animal attack, tore them apart. Even the children." I knew it was Louis. It happened on a full moon, and deep down I knew that monster was still out there somewhere. Still breathing. Still hunting. During my last week in the hospital, Lorraine and I grew close. We talked for hours, laughed about stupid little things, and for the first time since that nightmare on I-80, I felt something besides fear. I started looking forward to hearing her footsteps outside my room each night, looking forward to her smile. Then one night, we crossed the line and kissed. The next morning, I checked out of the hospital carrying my rucksack, a bottle of painkillers, and Lorraine's address and number saved in my phone. But the thing I carried most was the feeling she gave me. Warmth in a life that had gone ice cold. I was supposed to leave North Platte and never look back. Instead, I decided to stay a while, just to see what might happen between us. I found an apartment in the Buffalo Bill Manor complex and took a janitor position at the nearby middle school. None of it was random. Every decision was made the way an Army Ranger plans a defensive position, layer by layer, thinking 3 moves ahead of the threat. The apartment was on the second floor with a balcony overlooking a wide-open courtyard drenched in floodlights all night long. No dark approach routes, no hidden stairwells. Anyone coming for me would have to cross open ground under cameras and the eyes of half the building. I spent days studying the complex before signing the lease, watching traffic patterns, learning which tenants stayed awake late, timing police patrols, and memorizing exits in case I had to move fast. The middle school was another calculated choice. Controlled access only. Reinforced glass at the entrance. Security cameras everywhere. Parents and guardians had to check in before stepping inside. If Louis ever tried to get near me there, he'd stand out immediately against a background of teachers and children. Predators survive in shadows. Exposure weakens them. But the truth was, none of those precautions were really for me anymore. They were for Lorraine. If I started seeing her, she needed to be in every tactical equation that ran through my head. The routes that were safest if she ever visited. Which restaurants had multiple exits. Which parking lots stayed crowded at night. We met up for coffee twice, and I caught myself checking reflections in diner windows whenever we were together. Scanning faces, watching hands, looking for the wrong pair of eyes staring too long. I never told her the full extent of it because I knew what she'd say. that I was paranoid, traumatized. Maybe she'd even be right, but Louis survived somehow. And if he realized Lorraine mattered to me, she wouldn't just become collateral damage. She would become bait. That thought kept me awake more than the nightmares ever did. Then bodies kept turning up across town. Hikers, drifters, all mutilated corpses. They made the local news, always described the same way. Animal attack, extreme trauma, authorities baffled. But one victim chilled me worse than the others. A man around my height and build like mine. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it didn't have to be. It felt deliberate. A message, a reminder that I was still on the list. I buried myself in research after that. If I couldn't outrun Louis, maybe I could understand what he was. My apartment slowly transformed into a war room. Books stacked across the coffee table, printed articles pinned beside maps, notes scribbled in Ranger shorthand. I studied every legend I could find about lycanthropy, shapeshifters, and ancient wolf cults. One story about Lycan. The king foolish enough to test Zeus himself by serving him human flesh. The god saw through the deception instantly and cursed him to become a beast, condemning him to hunger for human blood for eternity. The Greeks called it punishment. Other cultures called it inheritance. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Clans, bloodlines, heightened aggression, territorial behavior, predatory fixation. Some accounts described werewolves stalking specific victims for years before finally killing them. Not because they had to, because they enjoyed the fear, but despite their supernatural powers, they could be killed by normal means. That realization crawled into my head like a parasite. One night, I fell asleep on the sofa with an open book resting on my chest and the television flickering low in the dark apartment. I don't know what woke me exactly. No sound, no crash, no scream. Just a feeling. That ancient instinct buried deep in the human brain telling you a predator is nearby. My eyes snapped open. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant hiss of traffic outside. My skin prickled. Every ranger instinct I had started screaming at once. I sat up slowly and scanned the room. Then I noticed the balcony curtains moving slightly. I stood and moved carefully toward the glass door, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I pulled the curtain aside and looked down into the courtyard, my knees nearly buckled. A man stood directly beneath the floodlight. Long coat, baseball cap, completely motionless. His face tilted upward toward my apartment, and under the brim of that cap, 2 yellow eyes glowed like animal eyes caught in headlights. My body locked up instantly. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Every muscle froze while my brain tried desperately to convince itself there was a rational explanation standing down there in the light. But deep down, I already knew. Louis, I don't remember how long we stared at each other. Seconds, maybe. Maybe longer. Time felt warped, stretched thin like old rubber ready to snap. Then slowly he turned and walked away across the courtyard. Calm, unhurried, almost thoughtful, like a wolf circling a fence line searching for a weakness, like he was trying to figure out how to get to me. Then my phone rang and I nearly jumped out of my skin. For one terrible second, I thought somehow he had found my number. But when I looked down at the screen and saw Lorraine's name, the tension drained out of me so fast it almost made me dizzy. Her soft southern voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar, cutting through the fear that had wrapped itself around my apartment like fog. She said she was getting off work in about 30 minutes and wanted to know if I wanted to meet for coffee. I caught myself smiling before she even finished asking. It felt strange how quickly she could pull me back from the edge. 5 minutes earlier, I'd been standing frozen at my balcony, convinced a monster was studying me from the courtyard. Now, all I could think about was the sound of her laugh and the way her green eyes lit up when she teased me. Coffee suddenly didn't feel like enough. I told her to skip the coffee and let me take her somewhere nice instead. A real dinner. Candlelight. Music. Something normal for once. There was a brief pause on the line before she laughed softly and accepted. And for the first time in a week, just hearing her voice made the fear fade. That night, we met at a restaurant downtown, tucked between old brick buildings and glowing neon signs that painted the wet streets in shades of amber and crimson. Soft jazz drifted through the dining room, while candles flickered against dark mahogany walls and polished wine glasses. The place smelled of garlic, expensive steak, and aged wine, the kind of atmosphere designed to make people lean closer and talk softer. I arrived early on purpose. Old habits. I chose the table carefully, one near the back where I could see the entrance, the kitchen doors, and the reflection of half the restaurant in the front windows. No blind spots, no surprises. Even there, dressed in a blazer with a glass of wine in front of me, part of me was still operating like I was on patrol. The waiter poured a glass of Cabernet while I checked the room one last time. Then the front doors opened. Lorraine walked in, and the entire restaurant seemed to pause for half a heartbeat. She wore a little black dress that hugged every curve like it had been tailored specifically for her. Black heels clicking softly against the floor as she moved through the candlelight. Her red hair spilled over her shoulders in loose waves, and the deep red lipstick somehow made her green eyes stand out even more. Heads turned immediately. Conversation slowed. Even the bartender glanced up. But all I could focus on was her. She spotted me and smiled, and that smile hit harder than any drink ever could. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest loosened. The fear, the paranoia, the constant feeling of being hunted faded beneath the warm glow of the restaurant lights and the sight of her walking toward me. Lorraine greeted me with a soft kiss that lingered just long enough to make my pulse stumble. I stood and pulled out her chair, trying to play the role of a calm man on a normal date instead of someone constantly scanning exits and reflections. But instead of sitting across from me, she smiled and slid her chair close enough for our legs to touch beneath the table. Her perfume hit me first, warm vanilla and jasmine drifting through the candlelight between us. Then there was another scent underneath it, subtle but distinct, sweet, earthy, like fresh henna rinse still lingering in her hair. It caught me off guard for a second because it told me something strangely intimate about her. Lorraine wasn't a natural redhead. The deep crimson waves spilling over her shoulders were chosen, crafted, part of who she wanted the world to see. Oddly enough, that made her feel even more real to me. Before I could think about it any longer, she rested her hand gently on my lap and leaned close, her green eyes reflecting the soft gold glow of the candles. "I think I'm craving dessert already," she whispered with a slow, teasing smile. That look nearly erased every coherent thought in my head. After that, the night blurred into warmth and wine. We laughed over half-finished stories, shared bites of food we barely tasted, and found excuses to touch each other constantly. Her fingers traced circles against my wrist while we talked. Mine settled against the curve of her back whenever she leaned in. Jazz drifted through the restaurant while glasses clinked softly around us, but the rest of the room felt distant, like we were sealed inside our own little safe space. After an hour, we decided to head back to her place. The night air had turned colder, the streets quieter, the city slipping into that strange silence where every sound feels important. As we walked toward my car, that feeling hit me again. The same prickling sensation crawling up the back of my neck, like unseen eyes were locked onto us from somewhere in the dark. I slowed my pace. My eyes scanned storefront reflections, parked cars, the shadows between buildings. Then I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My body tightened instantly. Without thinking, my hand slipped beneath my jacket toward the gun tucked into the small of my back. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs as I turned slightly, already preparing myself to shoot first and ask questions later. My arm tensed as the figure stepped closer. Then a woman approached from the side and the streetlight lit their faces up. I sighed when I realized it was just another couple walking past us, laughing quietly to themselves, wrapped up in their own night. We exchanged pleasant little nods, wished each other a nice evening, and kept moving. But even after I unlocked the car and Lorraine slid into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been watching from farther back in the dark. Moments later, we pulled up in front of the townhome Lorraine rented. It sat in a quiet cul-de-sac beneath pale streetlights, the kind of neighborhood designed to make people feel safe. No tree line, no woods pressing against the property, no dark forest waiting beyond the backyard. Her small yard was fenced in tight with a locked gate and motion lights overlooking every corner. I felt relaxed. Inside, the house smelled faintly of magnolia and jasmine-scented candles. We went upstairs and tangled hungrily together beneath the sheets while the world outside stayed still and silent. By 3 a.m, I felt Lorraine stirred beside me and slipped out of bed to use the bathroom. I heard the soft click of the door shutting. Half asleep, I rolled over, already drifting back under. Then a chill crawled up my spine. Not cold air. Instinct. I heard breathing behind me. Low. Raspy. Wet. My eyes snapped open, every muscle in my body locked tight with terror because deep down, before I even turned around, I already knew what stood in that room. Louis, in full werewolf form. Slowly, carefully, I slid my hand beneath the pillow and wrapped my fingers around the grip of my gun. My heart hammered so violently I could hear blood rushing in my ears. Then the creature moved. A clawed hand slammed into my shoulder with enough force to crush bone. I was ripped off the bed like I weighed nothing and hurled across the room. The wall exploded behind me as my back smashed into it hard enough to crack the drywall. Pain detonated through my body. I looked up. The werewolf stood in the darkness near the bed, nearly blending into the shadows. Black fur, massive shoulders, saliva dripping from rows of yellow fangs. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine with something worse than rage. Recognition. It knew me. It tilted its head toward the gun in my hand, almost daring me to pull the trigger. My hand shook as I raised the gun. The second the barrel came up, the beast lunged backward and exploded through Lorraine's bedroom window in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The sound tore through the night like a bomb. Then silence. I sat there staring at the empty frame where the window had been, my shoulder pouring blood from 4 deep claw marks. Cold night air swept into the room carrying the smell of wet fur. I don't know how long I sat there. Seconds, minutes. Everything felt distant, muffled, unreal. Somewhere far away I heard Lorraine screaming my name. Daryl! I blinked. Reality crashed back into me all at once. The cracked wall behind me, the destroyed window, the blood running down my arm, and the humiliating warmth spreading down my leg. I had pissed myself. Lorraine rushed toward me, grabbing my face, her voice trembling. Daryl, what happened? At first, Lorraine's voice sounded distant, warped, like she was speaking to me from underwater. Daryl. Daryl. The room spun. My ears rang. I could taste blood in my mouth and plaster dust coated the back of my throat. Then suddenly her voice snapped into focus. Sharp. Panicked. Real. I turned my head toward her, still sprawled against the wall, unable to speak. Lorraine stooped near me, clutching a sheet around herself, her green eyes wide with terror. She wasn't looking at me. She kept staring at the shattered window and the claw marks gouged deep into the wall beside the bed. She had seen it. The thing. With shaking hands, she got dressed and called the police while I forced myself upright. Every movement sent fire through my shoulder where the claws had ripped into me. I pressed my hand against the wound and tried to steady my breathing, but all I could think about was the look in Lewis's eyes before he disappeared into the night. He could have killed me. He wanted me afraid instead. What was that thing, Daryl? Lorraine asked softly. The question hit harder than the pain in my shoulder because her voice carried certainty. She wasn't asking if I saw something. She knew she had. In the distance, sirens wailed through the sleeping neighborhood, growing louder by the second. I lied to the police. I had to. How could I tell them it was a werewolf? They would lock me in an asylum. So, I told them an intruder broke in, attacked me, and fled after I pulled my gun. They searched the townhome while the maintenance man boarded up the shattered window. One of the officers kept staring at the deep grooves in the drywall where Lewis's claws had dug in. He looked unsettled but said nothing. Even after they left, the feeling remained. The neighborhood eventually went quiet again, but the silence of the morning felt wrong now. Every creak of the settling walls made my pulse jump. Lorraine walked into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a steaming mug. My hands were trembling when I took it. I sipped the coffee and blinked in surprise. It was rich, sweet, almost smoky, warming me in a way that cut through the fear crawling around inside my chest. Where did you get this? I asked quietly. What is it? A faint smile crossed her face despite the terror in her eyes. Café du Monde coffee, she said softly. A little taste of home. For a moment the room didn't feel so cold. Then I remembered the look on Lewis's face before he dropped the "I'm a werewolf" bomb on me. I got angry. I finished the coffee, stood slowly and started getting dressed. Lewis had found me in Lorraine's home, and he let me live. Big mistake. I holstered my gun, grabbed my jacket, and looked at Lorraine. I'll tell you everything, I said, but not here. I glanced toward the boarded-up window as the wind rattled it from outside. Come to my place tonight. I drove straight to the 27th precinct with one hand gripping the steering wheel and the other pressed against the bandage on my shoulder. Every red light felt like a trap. Every shadow near the sidewalk made my pulse spike. By the time I stormed into the station, I looked half crazy. Bloodshot eyes, dried blood still crusted beneath my fingernails. I didn't care. I need to speak to the detectives who talked to me at the hospital. I snapped at the desk sergeant. Now. A few minutes later, they brought me into the bullpen. The same detectives looked up from their desks with tired eyes and hot coffee cups in their hands. I got right to it. Lewis isn't dead. The room seemed to freeze for half a second. He attacked me last night, I continued. He's the one killing those people. I pulled back my jacket and showed them the claw marks carved deep into my shoulder. Angry red wounds stretched across my skin like something had tried to peel me apart. Neither detective reacted the way I expected. No shock, no fear, nothing. One of them sighed and leaned back in his chair. Look, kid. I know what I saw, I barked. Heads turned across the precinct. Phones stopped ringing for a moment. I could feel officers staring at me like I was unraveling right there in front of them. The older detective stepped closer, lowering his voice. You were attacked by a man. Trauma does things to memory. No, I growled. That thing was not a man. The tension thickened fast. My hands balled into fists. I could already see one uniformed officer moving subtly toward me near the coffee machine. Then one of the detectives grabbed my arm. Interview room. Now. The tiny room smelled like old cigarettes and stale sweat trapped in the walls from 1,000 bad confessions even that early in the morning. He shut the door behind us and motioned for me to sit down. Calm down, he said firmly. I am calm. No, he replied quietly. You're scared. Before I could answer, he slapped a thick file down on the metal table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Look. I opened it. The first photograph nearly made me vomit. A blackened corpse lay strapped to a coroner's table. The body barely looked human anymore. Burned flesh clung to bone like melted wax. Its jaws were frozen open in a silent scream, revealing rows of warped animal-like teeth. But the eyes, even burned nearly shut, the agony on its face remained. And there was no mistaking what it had once been. Not fully human, not fully wolf, something in between. My stomach twisted harder with every photo. Clawed hands burned down to charred muscle. Elongated legs. Fragments of black fur fused into scorched skin. Whatever Louis had become, the flames and explosion killed it, burned it alive. "We know what you saw, and we believe you. He was something inhuman." The detective leaned against the wall, watching me carefully. "But you see now?" he asked. "That thing is dead." I stared at the photos, but all I could think about was the creature standing over Lorraine's bed, breathing in the dark. The detective continued talking. "We think it might be another one of those things." "He attacked me," I whispered. "Yeah, I believe you, kid, but trauma makes people connect dots that aren't there," he replied. "Louis is gone. We're sure of it." He kept repeating it. "Dead. Dead. Dead." Like if he said it enough times, maybe I'd believe it. Maybe he'd believe it too. Finally, I looked up from the photographs. "What happened to the body?" The detective frowned slightly at the question. "Standard procedure. Notify next of kin for identification." He checked his watch. "Coroner should still have a record downstairs." The second he said it, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I stood up so fast the chair scraped violently across the floor. The detective narrowed his eyes. I was already heading for the door. "Thanks," I muttered quickly. Then I walked out of that interview room with one terrifying thought pounding in my head like a drum beat. If Louis really was dead, then what the hell came through Lorraine's window last night? The coroner's office sat beneath the precinct like a tomb. Cold fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the narrow hallway in a sickly yellow glow. The deeper I walked, the quieter it became, until even my footsteps sounded wrong. The coroner himself looked old enough to belong down there with the dead. Thin white hair combed neatly back, wire-rimmed glasses balanced on the edge of his nose, cardigan buttoned all the way to his throat despite the heat. He sat behind his cluttered desk, surrounded by paperwork and the faint chemical smell of formaldehyde. And he refused to tell me a damn thing. "I'm not authorized to discuss any details of any investigation." I leaned forward, my shoulder throbbing beneath the bandages. "Do you remember who claimed this body?" I showed him one of the photos I snatched from the file. His pen paused for only a second as his eyes looked at the picture. Then he continued scratching across the paper. That was it. No concern, no curiosity, just another tired bureaucrat hiding behind procedure while bodies piled up. "The cops think it's a copycat," I said. "You saw the body. You know what it was." Finally, he looked up at me, eyes dull and exhausted. "I know what fire does to flesh." The way he said it sent a chill through me. Then the coroner sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Though," he muttered absent-mindedly, "there was this girl." My attention sharpened instantly. Dark-haired woman, black clothes, leather boots, one of those goth types, too much makeup. He frowned as though personally offended by her existence. Shame, really. Pretty green eyes hidden beneath all that black goop around them. I pressed him harder, but the old man clammed up again immediately, realizing he'd said too much. "I shouldn't have mentioned it," he snapped. "Now, if you'll excuse me." This conversation is over. I left before my temper exploded. Outside, cold wind whipped through the parking garage as I climbed into my car. My hands shook violently against the steering wheel. Rage rolled through me in waves, tangled together with exhaustion and fear. The attack last night kept replaying in my mind. The breathing in the dark, the claws, those fangs. My adrenaline surged again so hard I felt nauseous. I drove home barely remembering the trip. Once inside, I tore through stacks of books and papers scattered around my apartment until I found the old folklore text I was looking for, werewolf legends. I flipped pages frantically, scanning line after line while sweat rolled down the back of my neck. Then I saw it. 2 words: bloodline and clan. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor vanished beneath me. The book slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a heavy thud. My head began to swim as the truth finally assembled itself in my mind like pieces of a nightmare clicking together. Louis was dead. The photographs proved that much. Burned flesh fused to bone, blackened claws curled inward. That horrible frozen expression still stretched across what remained of his face. Whatever they pulled from that fire had once been Louis. So, the thing in Lorraine's bedroom wasn't him. I stepped out onto my balcony, the early afternoon sun hanging pale behind thick clouds. The courtyard below looked painfully ordinary. A woman walked a small dog near the fountain. Somebody watered plants on the 2nd floor. A lawn crew worked near the entrance with leaf blowers whining in the distance. Meanwhile, my mind was unraveling. I leaned against the railing, staring out across the courtyard while the pieces began fitting together one at a time. Slowly, reluctantly. How did it get inside Lorraine's townhouse without breaking the front door? Why didn't it hurt her? A cold feeling spread through my chest. Then another memory surfaced. The flowers. Every Friday. Always with those threatening little notes tucked between the roses. And every single time. Lorraine brought them into my room. I swallowed hard. The image forming in my head still didn't feel real, so my mind kept fighting it, looking for another answer. Another suspect. Then I remembered the smell in her hair the night we went out to dinner. Not perfume, something earthy, sweet, chemical almost. Henna rinse. I slowly turned and looked back into my apartment as the memory sharpened, her red hair catching the restaurant light, her green eyes fixed on me while she smiled. Not a natural redhead. Then the coroner's voice echoed in my head. Pretty green eyes hidden beneath all that black goop. Green eyes. Green eyes. Lorraine's eyes. My pulse began pounding harder. A little bit of home, she had said while handing me the coffee. Louis was from Louisiana. Café Fumond, a native blend to New Orleans. The bloodline, the clan. The words from the book slammed together inside my head so violently it felt physical. Suddenly every memory twisted into a different shape. Every flirtatious glance. Every comforting touch in the hospital. Every moment she calmed me down while keeping herself close to me. The picture in my mind finally completed itself. Lorraine was Louis' sister and a werewolf. The realization hit me so hard I nearly doubled over against the balcony railing. She had my address now, and she was coming over tonight. I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment as the realization settled over me like wet cement. What had I done? Every instinct I had screamed the same thing over and over inside my skull. She's coming to kill you, not tomorrow. Tonight. I tried to think rationally, tried to convince myself there had to be another explanation, another angle, something I missed. But every road led back to the same nightmare waiting at my door with green eyes and a soft southern accent. Reasoning with her wasn't an option anymore. She never loved me. The flirting, the concern, the late night talks in the hospital, the passionate night. All of it had been a game to her. A predator circling wounded prey while pretending to care about the bleeding. My stomach twisted with anger so sharp it almost burned. I forced myself to move. My hands felt numb as I grabbed the phone and dialed her number. One ring. 2, 3. Then her voice slid through the receiver like warm poison. "Hey, babe." The playful sweetness in her tone made my stomach tighten. I exhaled hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Cut the bull, Lorraine. I know who you are and what you are. You're part of Lewis' family or whatever twisted backwoods nightmare you crawled out of." I expected anger. I prayed for denial. Something human. Instead, she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a sharp, cracking cackle that sounded wrong coming from a human. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Daryl," she purred. No wonder Louis couldn't finish the job. The words hit me like ice water down my spine. My grip tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. "You sick bitch. I should have killed you last night," she continued casually, almost disappointed in herself. "But I wanted one more night with you before things ended." She gave a soft little sigh. Guess we can't always get what we want. For a second, neither of us spoke. All I could hear was my own breathing. Then her voice dropped lower, colder. "Listen carefully. It doesn't matter where you run now. I have your scent. And when I find you, I'm going to tear you apart slow enough for you to understand exactly what Lewis felt." Every instinct I had screamed at me to hang up, but I stayed frozen there, clutching the receiver like an idiot while my pulse hammered in my ears. Then she laughed again and let out a low, guttural growl. "See you soon, Daryl." The line went dead. I stood there staring at the phone, dazed, trying to process the fact that the woman I'd let into my life and shared a bed with had been hunting me the entire time. Then survival finally punched through the shock. I turned slowly toward the closet, the fear inside me cooling into something harder. Focus? Purpose? "All right," I muttered quietly. "Let's do this." I reached for my .30-06 semi-automatic rifle first, then the Mossberg 590 pump. Familiar weight, familiar tools. The kind of tools that didn't panic, didn't hesitate, didn't care about nightmares or monsters. I checked the chambers, inspected the ports, and loaded both weapons with steady hands. No wasted motion. No emotion. Training takes over when fear burns itself out. I grabbed my rucksack and started packing field gear the same way I had. Ammunition, flashlights, water, knife, medical kit, tent and ammunition, and a little extra I had shipped special for round 2 with Louis. Wolfsbane. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. 6 years as an Army Ranger had taught me something important about predators. Never let them choose the battlefield. I locked the apartment behind me and headed for the car. The evening air felt heavy, the sky already beginning to darken at the edges. Somewhere out there, Lorraine was hunting me, probably smiling while she did it. Good. I pulled onto I-80 and headed west. She can find me, I said to myself, eyes fixed on the road. But she's gonna work for it. Rule 1 when facing a stronger enemy. Force them to react to you. Make them defend. Make them adjust. Control the pace. Control the terrain. Control the fear. And tonight, that monster was going to need her A-game because it would be a full moon in 6 hours, and I intended to be ready before the sun disappeared. 6 hours later, I scanned the campsite one more time from behind my rifle. O'Fallon's bluff had been the right choice. I was positioned in the center of a barren rut near the ridgeline. No trees close enough for cover, no shadows to hide movement. High ground on every side except the river valley behind me. If Lorraine came for me tonight, she'd have to cross open terrain to do it, just the way I wanted. I'd spent the entire afternoon building the perimeter. Motion flares, fallback positions. By sundown, everything was in place. Now all I could do was wait. The fire crackled low beside me as darkness settled over the bluff. Above the trees, the moon hung massive and pale against the sky. Full, exactly like the night Louis hunted me. I forced myself to stay calm, stay disciplined. Fear gets people killed faster than claws do. The sounds of the wilderness drifted through the darkness around me. Crickets chirping, wind brushing through distant trees, the low rush of the river somewhere below the ridge. Normal, living sounds. Then they stopped, all at once. The silence hit so suddenly it felt unnatural, like someone had thrown a switch and cut the world off. Every muscle in my body tightened. I grabbed the rifle and crawled into position behind the rocks overlooking the clearing. Slowly, carefully, I brought the infrared scope to my eye. Movement, 500 yards out. Lorraine. She emerged from the darkness, walking slowly at first, almost drunkenly, her silhouette swaying beneath the moonlight. Then she staggered hard to one side as if something inside her was tearing itself apart. I watched her stop, sniff the air. Then her body began to convulse. The sound reached me a second later. Cracking bones, wet popping joints. A low, painful, distorted moan escaped her throat as she dropped to her knees in the grass. Her spine jerked violently, arms twitching, fingers curling into claws while her body twisted and reshaped itself beneath the moonlight. I tightened my grip on the rifle. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Then suddenly she stopped moving, completely still. My breathing slowed. The scope trembled slightly against my eye, and then Lorraine's head snapped upward. Her glowing eyes locked directly onto my position, as if she could see me staring at her through the darkness. Then the last pieces of Lorraine vanished. Her body lurched upward with a violent snap of bone and muscle. Fur exploded across her skin in thick waves of jet black. Her legs bent backward into hock joints while her spine stretched higher and higher until the thing standing in the moonlight was no longer a woman at all. It was a predator. 7 feet of muscle, claws, and teeth. Its shoulders rolled forward unnaturally as long talons dug into the dirt. Saliva hung from rows of fangs that gleamed silver beneath the moonlight. Steam poured from its mouth with every breath. Then it looked directly at me and roared. The sound slammed across the bluff so hard it vibrated in my chest. The fire behind me flickered violently as birds exploded out of the distant trees. For one horrifying second, my body forgot every bit of military training I had and reacted like prey. "Run!" The thought ran through my mind as fast as I could blink. Every instinct screamed it, but before the thought could even finish for me, she moved. Fast. Not human fast, not animal fast, terrifying fast. The werewolf burst forward with such force dirt and rocks exploded behind her hocked legs. 1 second she was 500 yards out. The next, she was a savage blur. My heart slammed against my ribs as she tore through the rut like a living missile, covering 200 yards in seconds. The sound of her claws striking stone echoed through the darkness. Jesus Christ. I forced myself to breathe. Slow. I lowered the rifle slightly and aimed for the rock wall lining the rut just ahead of her path. The crosshairs steadied for half a second while the creature closed the distance impossibly fast. Then I squeezed the trigger. The rifle thundered across the bluff. The round smashed into the stone wall and detonated rock outward in a violent spray of sparks and debris. The creature reacted instantly, exactly like I planned. With a furious snarl, she veered hard left to avoid the cascading debris, her claws gouging trenches into the dirt as she changed direction. I watched her change direction and head straight for the lone tree near the edge of the rut. Of course, even as a monster, she still thought tactically. The massive stump and hanging leaves gave the only real cover in the clearing. If she reached it, she could disappear long enough to flank me. My pulse hammered in my ears as I tracked her through the scope. "Come on," I whispered. The creature lunged into the shadows beneath the tree and vanished from sight. Then the night exploded. A deafening howl of pain ripped across the bluff so violently it echoed off the rocks below. The sound barely resembled anything human anymore. It was pure rage and agony twisted together into something primal. I saw the brush thrashing wildly. Good. She found the spikes. The hidden stakes I'd buried around the tree line punched through her feet and legs the moment she charged into cover. I caught flashes of black fur and clawed limbs rolling violently in the leaves as she tore herself free. She recovered fast. As I expected, I fired again. The rifle blast shattered the darkness and sparks erupted from the rocks beside her. The shot wasn't meant to kill her. It was pressure. Force her down. Force her back into the kill lane. The creature snarled and dropped low, retreating back into the rut exactly where I wanted her. She hugged the wall of dirt and stone, keeping her body beneath my line of sight. Good. I slowed her down, but only for the moment. I shrugged off my coat and left it near the firing position before rolling away into the darkness toward my second vantage point. Dirt and gravel scraped across my arms as I moved fast and low, keeping beneath the ridgeline. Never stay where the enemy last saw you. By the time I reached the second position, my lungs were burning. I carefully raised the rifle over the rocks and found her again through the infrared scope. The werewolf crouched low against the rut wall like a wounded lion. One clawed hand dragged across the spikes lodged in her leg, while her long tongue licked blood from her wounds. Her glowing eyes swept across my old position, waiting, searching. Rage burned inside them now. Then surprise, because she realized something that terrified her. I wasn't there anymore. I had her flanked, 100 yards out, perfect angle. I settled behind the rifle and drew a slow breath, the crosshairs resting directly over her heart as she crouched against the rut wall. Through the infrared scope, I could see every movement, the twitch of muscle beneath black fur, the steam rolling from her jaws, the hatred burning in those glowing eyes. But I didn't take that heart shot. At the last second, I shifted my aim slightly right and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked across the bluff. The wolfsbane round slammed into her side just beneath the breast with a wet burst of blood and fur. The creature let out a horrifying scream that echoed through the darkness and instantly snapped her head toward my position. Too late. I was already firing again. The second bullet punched into her opposite lung. The werewolf jerked violently backward as the impact spun her against the dirt wall. A horrible gurgling sound came from her throat as she tried to inhale. Then panic appeared in her eyes. Real panic. I watched the wounds carefully. No healing, no muscle knitting back together. The wolfsbane was working. The poison had shut her body down from the inside. She clawed desperately at the ground, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Blood frothed from her mouth while her massive chest convulsed in uneven spasms. Every breath sounded wetter than the last. Then her strength gave out. The creature collapsed hard into the dirt and slumped motionless against the rut wall. I stayed on target another few seconds, waiting, watching. Then I grabbed the Mossberg 590 and flashlight, slinging the rifle over my shoulder before moving down into the rut. The gravel shifted beneath my boots as I approached carefully, keeping the flashlight beam fixed directly on her body. Just in case. She began reverting back to her human. The thick black fur receded slowly beneath the skin like something crawling backward under flesh. Bones cracked and shifted. The hocked legs straightened with sickening pops while the claws shrank inch by inch into trembling human hands. Her red hair began to cascade over her shoulders. Lorraine lay naked in the dirt now, barely recognizable beneath the blood and mud. She coughed violently, a wet, choking sound, then wheezed for air that her ruined lungs could barely pull in as the flashlight beam held steady on her face. "This isn't over," she coughed. Blood ran from the corner of Lorraine's mouth as she struggled to breathe, her body trembling in the dirt beneath the flashlight beam. Even dying, there was hatred in her eyes. I stood 10 yards away with the Mossberg leveled at her face. For a moment the bluff was silent except for the crackling fire behind me and her wet, choking breaths. Then I slowly shook my head. "Yeah," I said coldly. "You're right." I pulled the trigger. The buckshot blast tore through the darkness. Her head exploded apart in a spray of blood, bone, and blackened tissue, the sound echoing off the walls of the rut like a grenade blast. Pieces of skull struck the dirt and rocks with sickening wet smacks while the body collapsed flat and twitching. Then everything went still. I stared at the corpse for several long seconds, shotgun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel, making sure. When I finally lowered the weapon, I grabbed the body by the arms and dragged it toward the fire pit. Her blood left a thick trail through the dirt behind me. The flames roared higher when I rolled her remains into them, sparks twisting upward into the moonlit sky like souls escaping hell. I stayed there the entire night feeding the fire. By 2 a.m. there was nothing left except ash, bone fragments, and the smell of burnt flesh clinging to the bluff. But Lorraine's last words stayed with me the whole drive. The highway stretched endlessly ahead as I drove toward her apartment in silence, hands tight on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to leave it alone. The other part knew better. By dawn, I was inside her apartment, tearing through drawers, closets, and boxes. Most of it looked normal at first glance. Clothes, photos, perfume. Then I found the black book hidden beneath her mattress. Rubber bands held it together. Inside were names. Dozens of them. I recognized them. They were the victims of the recent killings, all stained brown with old blood. Tucked into the back was an old photograph creased so many times it was beginning to split apart. It showed a white house on stilts sitting beside dark swamp water, somewhere deep in the bayou. Written along the faded white border were 3 words. Bartholomew, Bayou, Louisiana. 2 days later, 5 a.m. I crouched silently in the tree line overlooking the house from the photograph. The swamp air was thick and wet, alive with insects and the smell of mud and stagnant water. Fog drifted low across the bayou while the old house stood above it all on warped stilts like something rotting but refusing to die. There was movement outside, 4 figures, 3 young guys in their 20s and 1 old man. I stayed motionless behind the brush and watched them return from the darkness one by one. Naked, covered in mud and blood. They were coming home from a hunt Lorraine and Louis clan. I knew that's what she meant when she said it wasn't over. I watched as 2 of them laughed while climbing the stairs. Another dragged what looked like strips of torn clothing behind him. My jaw tightened when I saw human blood smeared across their chests and mouths. Then the old man appeared. He had to be in his 70s, but he moved with terrifying energy, bounding up the steps with a grin stretched across his face. His white hair hung wild around his shoulders while his bare feet slapped against the wood. "I love hearing them beg," he squealed excitedly to the others. "Best part is watching them squirm before the tearing starts." The others laughed. Then the old man suddenly pointed toward a younger man standing near the doorway. "Make sure the family honor is avenged," he snarled. "That son of a bitch dies before the end of the week. Make him suffer for killing your brother and sister, you hear?" The door slammed shut behind them. I looked down at the detonator in my hand, thumb resting on the trigger. I exhaled and pressed the button. The wolfbane I combined with the C4 explosives detonated all at once with a thunderous roar that shattered the silence of the bayou. Fire exploded through the stilts beneath the house, ripping the structure apart from underneath. Windows burst outward in flaming shards while the entire building lifted off its supports in a storm of smoke, splintered wood, and screaming. The shock wave rolled through the swamp. Burning debris rained into the black water as the house collapsed inward, consumed by flames. Their screams were drowned out by the roar of the flames. I stood slowly from the tree line, the inferno reflecting in my eyes. Then I turned away from the burning wreckage. I could see them inside being consumed in the flames, dropping into the flames one by one. Now it's over, I said quietly, and walked away while the bayou burned behind me.
If you enjoyed tonight's nightmare, take a moment to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. The darkness doesn't end when this story does. Beyond this video lies an entire universe of cryptids, monsters, and mysteries waiting to be discovered through Obsidian Quill Publishing and the works of R.W. Moore. Step into Blood in Brooklyn, a dark romance horror novel where vampires and werewolves move through New York City's shadows like predators wearing human faces. Detective Dacare Brooks finds himself trapped in a deadly struggle against ancient forces, forbidden desires, and secrets drenched in blood. Or venture into the hunt for Dogman, where a single encounter with an impossible creature shatters one man's understanding of reality and pulls him into a hidden world few survive long enough to see. Glowing eyes watching from the tree line. Footsteps pacing just beyond the reach of your flashlight. The unmistakable feeling that something is following you long after the story is over. These aren't just stories. They're warnings carried on the wind. Paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions are available now through Obsidian Quill Publishing. And if you're ready to journey deeper into the unknown, subscribe and join us for new tales featuring cryptids, dark folklore, werewolves, dogman encounters, and the kind of horror that stays with you long after the screen goes black. Because out here, beyond the safety of the firelight, some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some roads should never be traveled beneath the light of a full moon.